The evolution of warfare in the ancient world is perhaps one of the most significant and defining characteristics of the past. Of course, while things like architecture, language, and political structure all help define a culture's identity, it can be very difficult, if not impossible, for these things to exist without a commanding military presence. This is why, looking back at history, the largest civilizations, such as the Egyptians, the Greeks, and the Romans, all had specializations into the field of warfare to ensure the survival and spread of their culture. And so, seeing how the process of war evolves over time can help to visualize the values of ancient societies, as well as how they were able to rise and fall from prominence. We can begin our story at the Egyptian Bulletin of the Battle of Kadesh. Written in 1259 BCE, the Treaty of the Battle of Kadesh is the oldest surviving military treaty that exists today, and as such can teach us much about how warfare was viewed by many ancient kingdoms. Written in the Kamek Temple, the Bulletin of the Battle of Kadesh details the great military escapades of specifically the indomitable Ramses II. While some may be able to argue that this text is a little far-fetched, such as Ramses lighting the ground ablaze in his flaming chariot and blasting foes away as an unstoppable force, this literature does give great insight into how the Egyptians viewed the process of war. At the time, while structures and formations were undoubtedly needed for victory, because they had both chariots and infantry, so there had to have been some distinction, there was a much heavier emphasis on the achievements of singular men in conflict. This can be seen in the description of Ramses II and his actions on the battlefield. In the text, Ramses' formidable wrath is compared to the gods themselves, with the battle only being able to conclude with His Majesty having slaughtered them all in their place. They sprawled before his horses, and his majesty was alone, none other with him. This tells us a lot about how war was conducted in these ancient times. While, as previously mentioned, there were formations within the army, warfare at the time was clearly much more based on how much a single individual was able to achieve in the heat of battle, such as King Ramses himself. This is likely why, in these ancient times, the scale of armies was far more deterministic than it was later in history, with few numerical upsets on the battlefield. This can be seen in the Battle of Kadesh itself, as while the specific number of troops is largely disputed and inconsistent between sources, many historians agree that both the Egyptians and Hittite forces were similarly matched in might, each being about 20,000 men. With these somewhat equal armies, there was no definitive victory for either side, despite what the Egyptian writings may want to tell you. This style of warfare also says much about the social structure of the ancient kingdoms, such as Egypt, as it was likely a very hierarchical society, with heavy emphasis on a few, singular individuals, such as Ramses II himself. Another ancient text that reflects on the nature of historical warfare was Homer's Iliad, dated between the 8th and early 7th century BCE, which documented a very similar style of warfare. In it, there is significant emphasis on single warriors, such as Achilles, and their accomplishments in battle. This is much like the Egyptian Bulletin of the Battle of Kadesh, where in the epic poem The Iliad, there is significant emphasis on the invincibility of these singular warriors. The first significant change of this structure of warfare can be seen in the Greek phalanx style of warfare. This is a bronze hoplite shield constructed in about 550 BCE, and it is currently held in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. In contrast to prior shields of warfare, this shield was almost exclusively left-handed and constructed in such a way to only cover about half of a single soldier's person. The idea behind this was to create a formation where each soldier was dedicated to protecting not only himself, but his fellow warriors in conflict. For example, in this depiction of the phalanx style of warfare, soldiers marched side by side with large shields and massive spears that prevented anyone from trying to break the line. This was highly effective and allowed the Greeks to spread their influence largely across the Mediterranean. Looking at the social implications of this style of warfare is also very interesting, because unlike the previous heavy focus on hierarchical societies or specialized individuals, this phalanx warfare promoted equality amongst soldiers. Every individual was equal in the ranks and had to maintain their duty. However, this style of warfare had one major drawback. As armies grew, the phalanx forces grew more inflexible and slow due to the need to maintain positions. The long spears of the hoplites kept enemies at a distance, but if this line was breached, it would prove fatal for any army. This leads directly into the next style of ancient warfare, the Roman legions. This is a mains gladius, a Roman sword made in the 15th century BCE. It was recovered near the city of Mainz, Germany, which is how the blade earned its name. Currently, the sword is in display at the British Museum of the United Kingdom. This dagger is interesting because it embodies our final evolution of military warfare. Rather than armies focusing on large, impenetrable lines that kept enemies at a distance, the Roman legion was divided into very large blocks that were more suited to favor close-range, swift combat. Weapons like the Mainz gladius were far smaller than the phalanx spears and other long weaponry, making them far more brutal up close than their phalanx predecessors. As such, the Romans were able to expand their influence on a scale never before seen, taking control of almost all of Europe. Again, this style of warfare was also reflective of the society that created it, as the smaller forces being divided into the semi-independent regions of a larger empire was reflective of the Roman provinces during this time. As seen in this map depicting Rome under the rule of Augustus, Rome was cohesive and expansive, but still divided into many manageable provinces.